Nersa faces competing demands and considering Eskom's proposed hike in tariffs. The struggling state-owned parastatal has applied for a 20.5% electricity tariff increase for the financial year that starts in April this year. The request has been met by stiff opposition from various bodies and municipalities who say it is simply unaffordable. Let's look at the implications of this with Mike Rossouw, who's the CEO at Independent Energy Thought Leader. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Rossouw. Nersa rarely grants Eskom the full amount it applies for at times, but the size of this latest request could mean that electricity users could face even larger power bills this year. It's a difficult position that Nersa finds itself in because it's caught between a rock and a hard place here. For the users, it's unaffordable, while Eskom says it needs the money.
Yeah, the situation is quite simple. Firstly, the current methodology, which is being used by Nersa to determine Eskom's tariff, is dead wrong. It is the wrong methodology. That methodology was put in place many years ago when circumstances were very different. I know because I was on the Nersa board when this tariff structure was designed. First of all, Eskom are being rewarded for all assets, not even the assets that are working, even assets that are not working properly. And so that's the first problem. Secondly, Eskom's costs are out of control because they do not have the available plant that they should have. So the answer is very simple. The answer should be no to that increase. It's dead wrong, and Eskom are absolutely wrong, and they're confusing the public at large for such a large increase. The problem lies fairly and squarely, first and foremost, with government. They are not doing anything to revise the tariff methodology. And secondly, Eskom are asking for us to reward them for inefficient costs. Those costs have to be reduced, and the politicians have to step up to the mark. They're just twiddling their thumbs and doing absolutely nothing to change the methodology. And there it is.
And before we even get to the impact that this is going to have for households as well as small businesses, listening to what you're saying, then the argument by Eskom CFO that, they've tried to keep the costs as low as possible, but South Africans obviously are not convinced, and I'm listening to you as well. Mr. Kasim also says that an increase equal to inflation would severely affect Eskom's operations and would not allow the power utility to thus then be able to carry out the required maintenance across the network. Listening to what you've just said now when it comes to the methodology and the costs and the fact that nothing is being done to really address this particular problem, it doesn't sound like you're convinced with the argument that Mr. Kasim put forward to Nersa.
Mr. Kasim is wrong, and he should know better. I know him very, very well, and he's a good man, and he's a good financial guy as well. But he knows that he's using the tariff methodology to hide behind that application, firstly. Secondly, to threaten the public and government that they should pay for this is also absolute nonsense because it's based on the methodology. Change the methodology, the price will come down, and everything will be fine. I think this is hoodwinking, and the public are being misled massively. So let's get the situation straight. Change the methodology, get Eskom's costs under control, and that's entirely under Eskom's control, and we will see a much lower increase. There you go.
And I'm very interested in the methodology because getting the costs down, we've also seen in the public domain talks about, dealing with its bloated salary bill as well. But I'm very interested at a practical level. What does the change in methodology mean?
The change in methodology simply means this, that Eskom should be awarded a revenue that rewards them for good performance of their fleet, not for fleet that is not working or fleet that's not available. And so if you take that very simple equation into account, the methodology must be changed. It has to be changed to reward Eskom for assets that are working properly. And if that were done, they could probably even halve the application for what they call the reward or revenue for their assets or depreciation. And that's one of the largest increases of the application.
Now, whenever there's talk of tariff increases, we see various bodies, like we saw last week at the Nersa hearings, the city of Tshwane, the city of Johannesburg, coming out really, guns blazing against this particular increase. But this is going to have a negative impact on the households as well as businesses who may find themselves having to either cut back on power consumption or finding themselves having to cut back on some of their expenses. And this could have dire consequences for the economy.
Let me be very plain. This is what's going to happen. If Eskom are given that increase, two things are going to happen rapidly. One, people will generate their own electricity because they can do it cheaper and with less interruption than Eskom can at this point in time. And secondly, we're going to see a lower demand. That means Eskom's going to have less revenue and they're going to be screaming for more revenue. So it's a vicious cycle. They cannot get this increase. It's not fair. It's not absolutely not right to put that to the public at large. And to threaten and say government have to pay is absolute nonsense. I would have used another word, but on this program, I can't.
Mr. Rossouw, some economists believe that despite the objections you are raising right now and various objections that have been raised by various entities, that Nersa is going to grant a form of a tariff increase, whether we like it or not. And I wonder then for you, which scale would be a fair ask of the consumers, because it doesn't look like Nersa will not grant Eskom its request.
Yeah, I mean, I could do the calculations, and that's quite simple, based on a fair revenue methodology. However, I can tell you this much, that the increase should not be much more than inflation, and the consumers at large should not be paying well above inflation, which this application is. And so therefore, I'm saying that not more than maybe, 15% would be high, probably 12% would be fair. For the rest, Eskom have to go back to their costs and cut them, and government have to sit down with Nersa and revise that very antiquated and stupid methodology, which was good at the time, but it is inappropriate at this time.
All right, Mr. Rossouw, thank you so much for that. It really is going to be interesting to see what consumers have to deal with, especially come the 1st of April this year, whether or not we are going to see an exorbitant increase when it comes to those tariffs, or will there be some kind of a balancing act here that is being struck? It'll be interesting to see whether Eskom gets its way or Nersa, in fact, does curb, this particular tariff increase request. That was Mike Rossouw. He's the Independent Energy Thought Leader CEO.